Lisa, Nandy, which side are you on?
Morning. Well, I'm on the side of the people who are building and creating and driving this country, whether they work on the railways or they're trying to use the railways to get to work. Of course, we don't want strikes to have to go ahead this week. I live in the north of England. We've had 10 years of underfunding, bad management and broken promises on the railways, and we know what it means when the railways grind to a halt. But that's why the government has got to get round the table with the cleaners and the ticket office staff and the station workers to resolve this, because they're the only people who can. Only a few years ago, Grant Shapps was calling them true heroes. Now he's refusing to meet them. The government hasn't lifted a finger since March to engage in those talks. And during the pandemic, they took the right to negotiate back from the train operating companies. So they're the only people who can resolve this, and yet they're not prepared to do it. The biggest problem that this country has is not militant workers, it's a militant government.
You say that you don't want to see the strikes happen, but of course, you know, anyone would say that. You know, the RMT would say that, the government would say that. It's effectively a bit kind of meaningless. Wes Streeting has said previously that if he was a member of the RMT, then he would vote for industrial action. Would you?
Well, I'm not a member of the RMT. What I am is a member of Parliament aspiring to form the next government. And I can tell you what we would do in government. We would get round the table with the workers that Grant Shapps was calling true heroes only a couple of years ago and listen seriously to their concerns.
So
it's not just that they've had
if they want a pay rise of 11%,
it's also that they've got serious safety concerns
would you agree to that?
About what is happening on the railways. And that is exactly what the Welsh Government did. The reason that you haven't got strikes in Wales and you have got strikes in England is because in Wales you've got a Labour government and in England you've got a Tory government. It's not about whether workers go on strike, it's about the fact that we've got a government that is currently on strike and not doing its job.
And it's pretty clear that you obviously want the government to get around the table and you want you see negotiation as the way forward. But I'm just trying to kind of get to grips with, in the current situation, where your sympathies effectively are. You know, Mick Lynch, who we'll be talking to in a moment, he previously told me that Keir Starmer hasn't made it clear that he's on the side of the workers. If we just get this bland Democratic Party sitting in the centre of politics, taking their instructions off the Daily Mail to some extent, not getting behind workers' struggles, you have to ask yourself, why do they call themselves the Labour Party? What would you say to that?
Well, what I would say to that is that I want a government that actually delivers for all of its working people. These are the people who built this country, who kept us going during the pandemic, whether they work in the private sector and are trying to get to work on the railways or work in the public sector, trying to help people get to work on the railways. I want a government that delivers, and that is what Labour stands for. This government stands against all of those people. Only this weekend they were briefing out to the media that they'd had a good week, a wedge week they were calling it, because presumably they've been able to pit worker against worker, which is how they plan to maintain themselves in power. I'm calling it out because Grant Shapps has got some brass neck to come on your programme when this government is presiding over soaring inflation rates, the highest in 30 years, and has no plan to tackle the cost of living. They've dragged their feet on it for months, and they've got no plan to get growth back into the economy. This is a government that in 2019 came to power on a promise to level up, and instead what they've presided over is absolute chaos. Chaos at the ports, chaos on the railways, chaos at airports, chaos everywhere you go, and that is because this is a government that is not doing its job.
Talking to Grant Shapps earlier, just specifically talking about the strikes still, you know, the RMT want pay rises to keep pace with inflation. You know, for many people whose pay is not going to be rising like anything like that, that's going to seem like a pretty tall order. He also made the point about the amount of money that taxpayers are currently pouring into the railways. 4/5 of the 21 billion cost of Britain's railways works out about £600 per household. Is it not right that there are efficiency savings that have to be made on the railways as effectively fewer people use them?
Well, the efficiency savings that are being driven largely actually by frontline staff who can see where there's waste and are trying to take action to deal with it. I don't think it's an efficiency saving, though, to say you want to take a guard off a train. I'm not sure when Grant Shapps last got on a train, but the railways are fast becoming no-go areas for many, many people with disabilities, older people, women, particularly travelling late at night. You know, in the north of England, we remember this well. We had the IRA bombs in Manchester and Warrington. When I was growing up, we've had a terrorist attack at the Manchester Arena. In the face of all of that, the government should not be calling it efficiency savings to take skilled, experienced staff off the railways who help to keep us safe. That is why his interview with you, Sophie, was so utterly disingenuous. Because what he really knows is that the repeated amount of cuts that he's trying to make to the railways don't just harm the people who work on them, they harm the travelling public as well.
OK. Now, Keir Starmer has submitted his questionnaire to Durham Police. So if he's found guilty of COVID rule breaches, we know that he's said that he will resign. According to the Sunday Times, he's been doing a bit of succession planning, just in case that happens, not assuming that it's going to happen, but just in case. Apparently telling friends, I will not let this party become a basket case again. Now, the Times reports it's understood that he has since met a number of members of his shadow cabinet with leadership ambitions and has urged them to put campaign teams in place. Has he spoken to you?
It's absolute nonsense. No, he hasn't. And I've spoken to him twice in the last couple of days about how we persuade this government to lift a finger to avert a crisis on the railways.
Are you a bit worried he's been talking to Wes Streeting and not you then?
Local government funding. Sorry again.
Are you a bit worried he's been talking to Wes Streeting and not you?
But no, I'm not worried that he's been talking to anybody about succession planning, because I know that he's been talking to all of us about how we rid this country of a government that has held us back for the last 12 years and finally start to deliver for working people. That is the conversation that we're having in the Labour Party at the moment. Our eyes are not on the Labour Party. For too long, we spent time debating the Labour Party. We care about the country. That's what we're in politics for, and that's what we're discussing.
There are, you say that, you know, we're all discussing about politics, but there is obviously discussions going on in Shadow Cabinet that are perhaps a little bit less favourable. Lots of reports that members of the Shadow Cabinet have been telling Keir Starmer to stop being so boring, leaking stories to the media. He apparently addressed it in Shadow Cabinet and effectively told them to stop. What is going on? Is that true?
No, we're completely focused on what is happening in the country at the moment because we live in it, and we couldn't care more about the fact that at the moment you've got a lot of people, not just some people now, but most people who really can't make ends meet. I can't remember a time when people worked this hard and then got home at the end of the week or the month and found that they couldn't keep their heads above water. The soaring inflation rates aren't just causing problems for families, they're causing problems for businesses as well. And every bit of our energy is going into not just being an opposition to this appalling government, but to being a genuine alternative, so that come the next general election, we can finally move forwards as a country and start to get money back into communities, good jobs back into communities, money back into people's pockets, and get this country working again.
If every bit of your energy is focused on that, on becoming the alternative to the government, why haven't you got more eye-catching policies? Is the problem not that Keir Starmer is too boring, but that your policies are a bit too boring?
Well, look, I'm standing here in Warwick today at the Labour Local Government Conference, where Keir and I are setting out plans to smash up a century of centralisation and to get power back into local hands and into communities where it belongs. We've done it before in government through the regional development agencies. We were able to bring advanced manufacturing jobs to Rotherham. We were able to bring wind energy jobs to Grimsby. Now there are kids in Grimsby who are powering the world from the Grimsby docks, getting money back into people's pockets and money back into the local community. That's what we're going to do again. It is bold, it is ambitious, but it's also not any more ambitious than people in this country are for themselves, their families, their lives and their communities. And they deserve a government that will meet that level of ambition. This one's not going to do it, so we are.